Welcome to the Social Bee podcast with your host, Louise Brogan. Every week, Louise will be bringing you a podcast all about women entrepreneurs, talking about their challenges, their goals, and inspiring you to either start your own business or grow the business you have. Visit www.socialbeeni.com to join our community and pick up some lovely freebies to start marketing your business online today.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Social Bee podcast. Today is a very special episode for me because it is actually my 100th episode, which is amazing. I'm not sure I thought that I would get here. I think part of me wondered around the 70 or 80 mark, would I stop at 100? Because it's actually quite a lot of work to produce a podcast that goes out every week. And I haven't always had a podcast out every single week. I've probably missed 2 or 3 weeks across the last 2 years, whether that was just having too hectic a schedule or being on holiday with the family. Would be really the main reasons I would miss one. So I asked my audience for some questions that they would like me to answer in my 100th episode. And I have to say, I got brilliant questions, and my kind of disclaimer here is that one of the questions was about being organised and how far in advance I plan my shows. And I will tell you now, that is something I am not very good at. So I'm actually recording this about 4 days before it goes out live. And one thing I'd like to really do for the next 100 episodes, if we can get there, would be to actually plan much better, plan out in advance. My podcast is not necessarily a solo effort. I have 2 amazing people in the background who help me. One of those is Chris at ST Mastering, who is my podcast editor, and we have a really great relationship and it's really smooth. Once I actually record the podcast, the whole transition to getting it up and out on the air, Chris has made really smooth for me, and I'm really grateful for that. I decided to go with an editor, I think pretty much from the start, because I tried to record and edit myself and I thought, no, I don't have time to do all this. So getting an editor was probably the first best decision I made about the podcast. You can find Chris at stmastering.com. The second best decision I made about the podcast was bringing in Sarah Bissandri as my show notes writer. So this is kind of weird because she'll be listening to this or reading this off Otter, the software that I use, and going, oh, that's me. So thank you so much, Sarah, for all your hard work. And I brought Sarah in about 30 episodes ago, maybe 20 or 30 episodes ago. And she has really done an amazing job. She takes my garbled words and turns them into really good show notes that I'm able to put then on my website and into Libsyn, which is where I host the podcast, which then fires it out across all the different podcasting apps where you're listening to it now. So huge thanks to Chris and Sarah, and I highly recommend them if you're looking for somebody else to help you with your podcast. So looking at the questions that I have, shuffling my papers here. Okay, so I'm going to try and answer these in terms of, so that makes it a good flow through the questions. So let's have a look. So Shelley Warren asked me, what is the story behind your business name and your podcast name? When I started this business back in 2013, I had a lot of fun playing around with the business name actually. And the social came from social media, because I started out as a social media manager. And I was throwing around lots of ideas. My first Twitter handle was Social Biz NI. The NI comes from Northern Ireland, and it is something that is it hangs on the end of my name, because actually almost 50% of my clients come from outside of Northern Ireland or even the UK. So it's funny that my new logo is really Louise Brogan, the Social Bee, but Social Bee, whereas I thought it was a genius name, when I looked it up online, lots of people had it. So I moved from Social Biz to Social Bee because I don't really like Biz, B-I-Z. I don't know why. I don't like them. I'm quite particular about words and how they look. That's something probably quite psychological. For example, when I gave names to all of my children, they had to have initials that looked right. So my son's initials are D-A-R-B, even though I wanted the R, which is my daddy's name, Ronnie, to be my son's second name, but I couldn't give him the initials D-R-A-B for obvious reasons. So words and how they look are really important to me. And social biz, and I just didn't like it, didn't sit well. And I was firing around ideas in my head, and I thought social B. And then I came up with this whole line, creating a buzz about your business, and that was it. I was just sold. So when I wanted to start a podcast then 2 years ago, it was a no-brainer that it would be called the Social Bee Podcast. And I did worry initially that people would think, well, if I call it something more obvious, like social media marketing with Louise Brogan, but it didn't really go with my branding because, people say, oh, Louise, the Social Bee. And people would come up to me at events and say, hey, you're the Social Bee. And it's kind of not lighthearted, but it's kind of a fun name. And, I'm not the standing at the front of the room strict trainer. That's not my personality. And if you listen to this podcast, that's not my personality in the podcast either. So it was kind of a fun name, and the podcast was going to be called after the business, basically. And that does say Social Bee Podcast for women entrepreneurs. And that is actually going to be going that part because I work with as many men these days as I do with women. So it's actually, we're going to switch to focus really on the podcast on LinkedIn. And I am currently playing around with names for the podcast to be Social Bee Podcast and something to do with LinkedIn. So if you've got any ideas, fire them into me. I'd love your help. Might do a few polls online. So that is the story behind the business name and the podcast name. Carmel Siri asked me, can I remember how long it took to do my first podcast compared to how long it takes now? If you went back and listened to my first 10 or 15 podcast episodes, you will know that I did set questions. And the people I interviewed, I sent them the questions in advance. And I ditched that format probably around the 30 because actually what I like doing is having conversations with people. But I came up with those questions, and there was 12 questions that I asked every single guest, and it was based on the format of other podcasts I'd listened to, and I switched it. But the first podcast, how long did it take me? I recorded it with Hannah Martin from the Talented Ladies Club, and I learned a lesson really fast because when I listened back to it, I couldn't hear Hannah. So we had to re-record the first episode, so it actually took me far longer. Actually doing the episodes, it's probably the same length of time because some of the episodes are as short as 10, 15 minutes. Some go on for maybe 40, 45 minutes. And I literally record them and they're done and I send them off to Chris. So it's not that I go over them and do them again or re-record them or anything like that. It's very much stick in the mic, hit record and off I go. So it doesn't take me that much longer, but the first episode I did have to re-record. And I learned that my guests have to have a proper plug-in mic. And the reason being, if you are do I record these over Zoom? That's the other thing. I have met other podcasters here locally who record in person, and I don't record any podcasts in person at all. I'm sitting behind my laptop in my house with my mic, and my guests could be anywhere in the world, but they have to have a microphone that plugs into their laptop. Because if you turned your head to look out the window and you're using the microphone on the computer, you lose the person's voice. So sound quality is really important. The research I did before starting the podcast was meeting with two friends locally who work for the BBC. John is a sound guy. I don't know what John's title would be. Sorry, John. I don't think he listens anyway. And he talked me through all of the techie stuff from his end. And he said, number one thing for him was if you're going to record it online, turn off the video, because when you're talking to somebody from anywhere else in the world, if the internet packets are being used up by the video and the audio. So by just having audio, it's better quality than having audio and video. So that's a little tip for you there. Okay, so Moira Mackey asked, what tips would you give for someone getting started on podcasts? I would say be strategic about your podcast. Why are you doing it? If you're just doing it for fun, then just fire on. But if you're doing it to raise your visibility as an expert are you doing it because you want to raise other people's profile? Have a key in mind as to why you're going to do it, and remind yourself of that. Talking about how I'm switching the podcast now from general talking about people about how they started their careers and their businesses and social media to really focusing on LinkedIn. It's because I am niching down completely into LinkedIn training and speaking in my business. So it's very strategic. And also I started out that I only interviewed other people, and I realized that what I was doing there was really giving other people the platform. And when I started doing solo episodes, that's when I started to actually raise my own profile. So decide, think about why you want to do a podcast. Do you have time to do a podcast? What is your topic going to be? Where are you going to find your guests? Are people going to be able to pitch you? Will you accept pitches? Will you find your own guests? What way are you going to do it? So those are lots of different questions. A couple of episodes back, I had Colin Gray and we were talking about starting podcasts. And I also have in my online school, I have a whole class from Kate Erickson of Entrepreneurs on Fire on getting started in podcasting. So we'll put a wee link to that below if you wanted to access that. And if you are serious about starting a podcast, definitely do some training in advance, I would say. Okay. Summer Pocket has said, how do you come up with your guest questions? Oh dear. I'd love to say that I spend 3 hours researching the business and the guest and write out all the questions, Summer, but that's not actually how it goes at all. Generally, the person coming on is somebody I've invited on because I've seen them online or met them and I find them interesting and think that they would be an interesting person to interview and that they would have something that my audience would be interested in. So I generally know about the person in advance. But I always go and check through their website just before we start the podcast and read through what they do, what they say. And really, I think it's my inquisitive mind. I just like asking people questions. So the questions now are not planned in advance at all. It's literally a conversation with somebody. I love having conversations with people. I'm so interested in business and businesses and how people started and how they find their clients and what they do and how they market themselves, that it just really flows out of me. I think it's part of the Northern Irish personality type. We like to talk. We are talkers. My daddy was a massive talker. He talked the hind leg off a donkey. So he would, and he was well known for it. When I went to university and we had all the parents came over for graduation, one of my friend's parents commented later about how much my dad talked. So I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as they say. And that leads me on to another question from Shelley. Do you realise that your Northern Ireland accent is lovely and we Canadians love a great accent? Well, that's really funny, Shelley, because I don't think my accent's lovely at all. And then, interestingly, in the island of Ireland, the Northern Irish accent is seen as slightly harsher than like the lilting tones of people from the south. So I really appreciate you saying that you like it. Thank you very much. Someone also asked, what microphone do you use? I use a blue Snowball. Now it says blue on it, but it's actually white. So it's called Snowball Ice Blue microphone. I plug it in the USB. I will share a link to that in the show notes. I bought it over 2 years ago and it's so reliable and I love it. It's just really cool. And the kids, when I first got the kids loved it too. They thought it was really cool. It looks like something, it's just very unusual looking for a child to have your mother having this weird round microphone on her desk. Now they don't care anymore at all, but they liked it at the start. Okay. Someone also asked, do I do my own editing? No, I don't. I talked about that with how I use Chris. What else do people ask me? Have you stuck to the same music and voice intro package since you began? Yes, I have. And the lovely person who introduces the podcast is my friend Claire McCollum, who is a presenter on Songs of Praise for the BBC. And I spoke about Claire, I think, previously in the podcast. Claire and I have known each other since we were 4 years old. And we went to the same primary school, the same secondary school, even the same university. We both did geography at Dundee. And we both live back in our home village and raised our kids. And our kids are going to the same secondary school as each other now as well. So Northern Ireland is really, the whole country is really a village. But Claire did my intro for me and I am going to change the intro in terms of focusing on LinkedIn, but I need to decide what I want to say first, and then I'm going to ask Claire, will she re-record it for me, which I'm sure she will. Moira wanted to know who has been my